Then why are you here?
For the content.
Yeah, we're here for the content too, but I promise this will not be a case of me looking through a political lens at something non-political. My Little Pony: A New Generation is clearly political. How? Well, the film is set in a world where Earth ponies, unicorns, and Pegasi each hate and fear each other. The land of Equestria is a house divided, and our main character Sunny is an Earth pony whose goal is to show the world that they can all get along. But to unify the different types of ponies, she has to come up against the isolationism, xenophobia, and hate that's been perpetuated. Most Earth ponies fear and despise the unicorns and the Pegasi, and yes, that's the plural of Pegasus. But Sunny doesn't feel the same because her father was privately devoted to researching the history of the different kinds of ponies, and he taught her how they used to all be friends. He taught this to her as both historical fact and as a fantastical bedtime story, and sure enough, Sunny grew up to be a 20-something devoted to proving to the world that all pony kinds can coexist. But she's got her hooves full with this work, let me tell you. To understand how the politics of this movie goes beyond just being friends is good, let's look closer at Sunny's community, which is the town of Maritime Bay, home of the Earth ponies. There's a huge corporation in her town called Cantor Logic, which really seems to have put its imprint on the town, and they profit from the fear Earth ponies have of unicorns and Pegasi. Like, they sell anti-mind reading hats to protect from mind-reading unicorns and Pega periscope goggles to allow ponies to scope out the sky for Pegasi. One of the first scenes of the film is Sunny sneaking into the Cantor Logic building to stage a demonstration during the company's big annual show, and she gives a speech about how fear is not the answer and,
We're not in danger. It's all a lie. We don't need any of this Cantor Logic junk.
So the basic let's all be friends plot is elaborated as Sunny takes a moral stance against the framing of outgroups as violent and the industry perpetuating that perception. We can see clear parallels to modern day with this, of course, with widespread fear of immigration, as well as the modern reality of corporations profiting off of this widespread xenophobia. So we see the mass xenophobia and the corporate stoking of it, but the military-industrial complex in this case doesn't come with much of a police state, though, in Maritime Bay. The only apparent police presence consists of Hitch, who's Sunny's childhood friend, and Sprout, who's also her childhood friend and is also the son of the CEO of Cantor Logic, Phyllis Cloverleaf. I erroneously thought Sprout and Hitch were brothers because we meet them back in the opening scene when Phyllis picks them up from Sunny's house because she doesn't want Sunny's dad brainwashing them.
You are brainwashing their minds with all of your nonsense.
It's called research, Phyllis.
Mrs. Cloverleaf clearly has been a racist conspiracy theorist for a while, and it's possible she was already powerful at the start of the movie before the jump to present day about a decade later, since Sunny's dad accused her of being the one brainwashing people in that opening scene. So maybe she's been CEO for quite a while, or had some other powerful position back then, if, assuming we can trust Sunny's dad since he turns out to be right about everything. But anyway, my point is she's the most politically powerful person in Maritime Bay, and she even later makes her son Sprout into the police chief when Hitch goes on a trip. And this kind of, demonstrates how the state has historically been manipulated by private industry. So I think, good job, My Little Pony. I think that's a good point. So, despite or because of Sunny being childhood friends with the sheriff, she knows which laws she can morally break, and she's fine going into this Cantor Logic building and breaking in and causing a ruckus. After her demonstration, Sheriff Hitch confronts her and lets her know she broke a bunch of laws, and he exhibits the xenophobia that drives their legal system in this exchange.
What did you think was gonna happen? You give a little speech and what? Every pony just magically welcomes unicorns and Pegasi into Maritime Bay?
So we've established that their society is systemically racist, but before we dive deeper into details, we need to generally give a rundown of the plot, just so we all know what's happening. So Sunny's world gets rocked soon after the events I just described, because a unicorn, Izzy, comes to Maritime Bay, and Sunny realizes unicorns don't have magic after all, and that unicorns believe Pegasi stole their magic. They go to the Pegasi city, and eventually, through a series of events we'll get into, they steal a crystal from the queen, and then they go to the unicorn's hometown and they get another matching crystal, and then they return to the Earth Pony Sunny's town, Maritime Bay, eventually to find the last crystal. They put them together, it doesn't totally work, then they put together this other magical object, we'll get to that, and they restore magic to the world, and it's quite a bit more complicated than that, but that's the bones of it. Let's just get that covered. This movie is also a musical, and I will say the music is pretty great. Some of the songs absolutely slap.
Gonna be my day.
This film raises questions about how our historical narratives shape the way we treat our neighbors, how historical narratives can distort natural differences, and how they can create irrational fear that leads to bad public policy. Like, Sunny freaks out when she realizes Izzy the unicorn can't shoot laser beams or read her mind or levitate stuff or anything. And unicorns have the narrative that all Earth ponies smell like rotten sardines and that they're lazy and stupid and so on.
But of course you know that already. You've probably been reading my mind this whole time.
So first I kind of just realized that their stereotypes are bullshit and that they've been lied to about each other. Then, as I said, Sunny learns that unicorns have the narrative that Pegasi stole their magic. So the two of them set off to Zephyr Heights, which is where the Pegasi live. And it's just in time for the royal celebration, a bash for the queen, because Zephyr Heights is a monarchy, apparently, and the princess is gonna perform and blah blah blah. But none of the Pegasi are flying, Sunny notices, as the guards bring her and Izzy to the queen, who sends them to the dungeon immediately when Sunny asks about magic.
We only want to ask you a few questions about magic. We've been...
Guards, please escort these ponies to the dungeon.
So they're jailed on site in Zephyr Heights, just like Izzy was targeted to be jailed on site in Maritime Bay and would have been if the police were more competent. And later, when they go to the unicorn town Bridalwood, the Pegasi and Earth ponies have to put fake horns on to blend in, presumably because being identified would be dangerous. It's interesting that there's mutual discrimination between the three groups. This movie presents no evidence that one group suffers more than the other, but that they all oppress each other equally. It's odd to create a story that's a clear allegory of how it's wrong to discriminate against outgroups, but in this story there's a sort of mutual subjugation, not the kind of asymmetric power imbalances that actually characterize systemic discrimination in real life. The only significant antagonizing and subjugating force comes later, but spoiler alert, it's Sprout, Sunny's childhood friend, who takes over for their mutual friend Hitch when Hitch leaves town to track down Sunny and arrest her, unaware that little Sprout was becoming a totalitarian sheriff and mobilizing Maritime Bay for a war of aggression against the perceived outgroups. It starts with Sprout speaking to the people, who are afraid that the unicorn comes back or that unicorns and Pegasi could come back together and threaten them. And this turns into the film's third song, and let's listen to the political statement of the lyrics.
Outsiders creep up slow and steady, wings glistening, horns at the ready, think what they could do to the status quo.
And then it goes on to say they're gonna steal, plunder, and pillage, they're gonna take over the village, and it ends with this.
Don't just sit on your butts and do nothing and wait, let's enter a blind, irrational state.
So let's enter a blind, irrational state. Okay. Sprout's very much able to whip up crazy fear because the ponies have been so indoctrinated, and he himself is maybe the most indoctrinated, being the kid of the person apparently doing the indoctrinating. This song by Sprout uses the chord progression of Smells Like Teen Spirit at one point, as this Media Tropes website points out, but what struck me even more is that its chorus, which I'll show, is identical to the beginning of Self-Esteem by The Offspring. It's in a different key, but listen to the beginning of the Offspring song. And this is the chorus of Sprout's song. I'm pretty sure they changed the key intentionally because they were like, everybody knows the beginning of that Offspring song. We're clearly copying it for the chorus. But anyways, I don't feel like pitch shifting it and trying to, show that it's the same. You can tell with your ear. But whatever, there probably aren't copyright laws in Equestria, so Sprout is all good, and he does much worse crimes later. Anyway, Sprout adds lyrics like, fight, see in black and white, that's your pony right. And he says also, it's all gonna work out painlessly if you follow my orders brainlessly. It's a perfect kids level critique of xenophobia, just the right amount of specificity. Some reviewers on IMDb found it a bit on the nose, with one saying they were surprised Sprout didn't straight up say make Equestria great again. Which I understand the critique, especially since Sprout's mom, the CEO who's done so much of the brainwashing, seems to also have big blonde hair reminiscent of the previous US president. But anyway, we can only hope that the people making and enjoying this movie and its political message understand the critique to extend to Democrats as well, and it's not just a, hey, Trump was bad, huh? Because Democrats do a lot of xenophobic shit too. It's likely that the viewers of the film, at least in theory, support immigrants, since according to a recent study, political independents and Democrats became significantly more favorable towards immigrants after 2016, even though that might not be clear from the machinations of the political machine. Interesting that in Maritime Bay, we don't have politicians as the ones perpetrating anti-immigrant propaganda. We have the CEO of a corporation doing it, and then her son, who she deputized to be the head of the police force. There are no other political leaders as far as I can tell in Maritime Bay, and the only person who was materially incentivized to perpetuate xenophobia, the CEO, seems quite happy at the end of the movie when magic and unity are restored, so her love of friendship probably, as far as the movie is concerned, overpowers any material incentive she had as the CEO of a company profiting off of the xenophobia, I mean. Because in this film, friendship and love are the main motivators, not material incentive. This goes back to the basic fact that the ponies don't need to struggle to survive. There isn't the experience of scarcity, manufactured or natural. We hardly see them ever even eat or drink, let alone work or anything like that. Instead of scarcity in Equestria, there's such wild abundance that even the dungeons in Zephyr City are high luxury, as we see when Sunny and Izzy are held there. This is all obviously fine because it's a kids movie. Obviously it's normal for this movie not to show ponies fighting for survival, but I mention it because it's part of what makes the message of acceptance and tolerance harder to map onto our reality. In our world, xenophobia comes from not just symbolic and cultural differences, but also from a perceived threat to material well-being. So when xenophobes in reality need to back away from accusing the immigrants of simply being weird and different, they claim that the immigrants are threatening jobs or economic security. But material resources are not significant in the world of Equestria. There isn't a problem of scarcity, manufactured or natural, so this wouldn't be a convincing argument for anyone to make, any pony to make, and so we don't hear any pony caring about this. There is one thing that incentivizes all the different ponies: magic. In this movie, proximity and contact between groups is not enough to dispel the xenophobia. What's necessary is the promise of magic being restored. Once Sunny promises that, they all work together, and once they achieve the goal, restoring magic, they all get along, as far as we can tell, besides Sprout, I guess. Having their stereotypes dispelled was only one part, and in fact their xenophobia and stereotypes aren't ever fully dispelled, since right up until the moment Sunny announces that none of them have magic but she's working to get them their magic, we hear the Pegasus Queen saying,
Unicorns are known to be cheaters.
You Pegasi always thought you were better than us.
Hey!
and we hear the ponies in the background saying, it's our land and you're not welcome here. The rediscovery of magic is what stops the xenophobia because it's the most essential resource. We can think of an analogy to distributing food, water, shelter, and other necessities to citizens in our world, and if we follow the logic of this film, the elimination of scarcity affects the elimination of irrational xenophobic prejudice and discrimination. Interesting idea, since the immensely increased productive capacity of humankind since the Industrial Revolution seems to me like it might be able to furnish the abundance necessary to diminish diminish the material incentives of xenophobia if we cared to distribute the abundance fairly. Speaking of fair use of political power, let's look at the Pegasi community of Zephyr Heights. The Pegasi have a monarchical political structure with a queen in charge, of course. When the queen throws Sunny and Izzy in the dungeon without a trial, by the way, the two interact with Zip and Pipp, the two Pegasi princesses. Firstly, Zip is surprised to learn that the unicorns don't have magic, which is worth noting for a reason we'll come back to. Then when Sunny asks about the Pegasi public not flying, Pipp says this.
Every pony knows that only royals can fly, of course. What? But that's just the way it is.
First, can we just note how cute it is that the characters in this film say every pony instead of everybody? It's very cute. But anyway, when Pipp says this, clearly not being totally forthright, she makes her sister Zip agree begrudgingly, and Zip agrees with a bad conscience, clearly. This is because, as Zip admits soon, they can't fly, they've been faking it. When Zip confronts her mom, the queen, about this, the queen says this.
Pegasi are happy enough knowing that we royals can fly. It makes them feel safe.
And surely we are meant to criticize that a lie should be told to the public to make them feel safe, right? But the issue is complicated by the fact that when the truth is revealed that the royals can't fly, the queen is arrested, oddly enough, and the princesses go on the run from being arrested themselves. One might wonder who has the authority to arrest the royal family. I guess the state doesn't have a monopoly on violence in the Pegasi society, which is based. But you also sort of have to wonder what laws they broke that allow them to be immediately arrested. The way it seems to me is that throughout this movie, political power and other forms of power come from personal relationships, so the queen's political power is threatened by her lies to her people, since the breach of trust destroys her relationship with them and thus her political power. Speaking of political leaders lying, back in Maritime Bay, Sprout has weaponized xenophobia to promote himself to emperor, and he takes over his mom's corporation for his anticipated war against the unicorns and Pegasi. But before we get back to that, let's look at another example of how power comes from personal relationships, but instead of political power, let's look at technical power, or simply the level of a pony's skills and capabilities. After breaking out of the dungeon and stealing a magical crystal from the Pegasus Queen before she was arrested for not being able to fly, the gang heads over to Bridalwood, the home of the unicorns, to look for their crystal. They find it in the possession of Alphabittle, this big mean unicorn who plays games against the other unicorns and wins all their stuff from them. Sunny challenges him and wagers the Pegasus crystal, but then Alphabittle chooses to change the game from the Rubik's type cube game that Sunny thought it would be to a Dance Dance Revolution type of game, which is a bit unfair. But it's just interesting that the most oppressive force in Bridalwood is just this private individual. He's apparently the leader there, like the queen in Zephyr fucking Heights or whatever, and CEO Phyllis Cloverleaf in Maritime Bay, and this is confirmed by each of them being the ones who at the end put together the pieces of the magical object to unite the ponies. Anyway, Alphabittle has amassed significant power and property through his apparent natural size, power, and intelligence, and Sunny is clearly at a disadvantage when challenging him. After losing 2 rounds and only having 1 left to win, we see this moment.
Hey, you hear that, Sunny? Feel the rhythm take you over. You feeling it?
Oh, I'm feeling it.
This confused me. Sunny somehow gets inspired just by looking at Izzy and hearing her encouraging words about feeling the rhythm. And then Sunny wins, because it's a movie, sure, but I think that it's kind of interesting that through these encouraging words, she happens to have the ability to perform better. I was confused by this and I thought, well, Izzy tells her to feel the rhythm, maybe that's a reference back to one of the songs they sang together. But I went back and it wasn't. I even looked it up on Wikipedia and a few various MLP fan boards, and as far as I can tell, this is just a standalone thing where Izzy says encouraging words and then Sunny is infused with the power of these words and their friendship. This fits with the idea of power coming from personal relationships, in this case rather than political power, it's capability and skill that is drawn from relationships. She wins the crystal but gets outed as an earth pony, so they scramble off. They run into Pipp and Zip's mom, the queen, who escaped from jail somehow, and then Alphabittle catches up to them and the two groups sort of face off. When they threaten to use magic against each other and it's like a fight's about to break out, Sunny makes a speech explaining that they don't have magic, but she's trying to get them their magic.
No pony has magic! But we are here to bring it back. Please, just let us try.
Please, Mom.
Trust us. you to... Fine.
The kids ask the adults to trust them, and they do. The leaders are affected by the power of the personal appeal made by the activist, like when global leaders meet with Greta Thunberg, except that instead of acting for 5 minutes that they care about the issue, these leaders in Equestria actually get on board with the plan to a certain extent. However, it's true that in this film, the strength of personal connection is enough to affect the leaders' minds precisely because it's coupled with a promise to deliver the most important resource to the leaders, which is their magic. If only Greta Thunberg could promise money or weapons to the countries that work to stop climate change. Something to think about, Greta. When they put the unicorn crystal against a Pegasus crystal and it doesn't do anything, it's the sad moment of the movie and Sunny experiences self-doubt. It doesn't occur to her that there are 3 groups here and they've only got 2 of the crystals, but presumably she assumes Earth ponies don't have a crystal because Earth ponies aren't magical. Well, guess what? They do have a crystal. By this point, though, Sprout has become a cute little fascist. He's played, by the way, by the irreplaceable Ken Jeong, who plays Ben Chang on Community. I almost expected Sprout at some point to say, "Ham, girl." But anyway, when Sunny returns and says they can bring magic back, Sprout's forces start defecting, but then Sprout tells them no, and he says,
"Don't listen! They've been brainwashed! You'll all be next if we don't end this now!"
A true totalitarian. Soon after Hitch tells Sprout to stop, he says,
"What, and let them have magic? Never!"
This echoes the same rhetoric Hitch himself had said earlier.
Giving magic back to our enemies?
It's kind of funny that Sprout immediately cares passionately about preventing the unicorns and the Pegasi from having magic, since he literally just found out this was a possibility, but now preventing it is his main motivation. It's not clear whether his main motivation is his xenophobic ideology, or if at this point it's just about simply keeping the power he's amassed. And this kind of leaves the question for the viewer of whether subjugating perceived outsiders is mostly just a means for politicians to get power, or an actual goal they care about. Since by now he's so powerful that his mom, CEO Phyllis, is the only one with any potential power over him. This makes sense because, as we saw, family relationships and personal relationships are the means of exerting power. Sprout got his position from his mom, and he can have his position challenged only by his mom.
Let's put the toy away!
Mommy, please, I'm in the middle of something!
You come down from there right now!
Anyway, Sprout creates chaos, but it dies down and the crystals get put together, but they don't work because what really needed to get put together were their hearts and souls, and also specifically the broken frame of a photo of Sunny and her dad. So the Pegasus Queen, CEO Phyllis, and Alphabittle put the pieces of it together one by one, since they're each the leaders of their communities, a monarch, a CEO, and a skillful gambler. When this makes them all get their magic back, Sunny somehow gets wings and a single horn. This conclusion is really confusing to me as a new MLP stan, though. Why did Sunny get a horn and get to fly, but the other Earth ponies didn't get a horn or to fly? Because she was the one in the photograph with her dad, she got extra skills? Or because she was the protagonist and the whole thing wouldn't have happened without her? Anyway, the Pegasi get to actually fly now, and the unicorns get their horns like infused with magic, and they all stop being depressed. That's the film, okay? But let's do a bit more thinking about it, since I don't know about you, but I don't have anywhere to be. If you ever want to analyze media, you absolutely have to rewatch it or reread it or replay it, understanding the whole and then re-examining the parts with that understanding. This is why I think reaction videos are notoriously superficial, because people don't know the entirety of what they're responding to at each moment of response. So let's go back to the opening scene. It's an imagined world of ponies, Pegasi, and unicorns, apparently from the previous MLP world, and they're all getting along, and then the film zooms out and you realize it was Sunny as a kid playing with toys with kid versions of Hitch and Sprout. And the play was ruined because Sprout was bored with playing like all the ponies were getting along, so he was making it dark and aggressively creating a violent situation in the imagined play. It's interesting that this seems to say that Sprout's had this aggressive, violent side all along to foreshadow his later totalitarian impulses. But it's just kind of not a very interesting motivation for a villain to have, like just being a temperamental kid who grew up with a racist mom and got brainwashed. It's like, that's not that interesting of a motivation for a villain. And as far as that socialization, I mean, I referenced it earlier, but this is a specific clip to help you understand how he was brainwashed by his mom.
My mom says the Pegasi and unicorns try to eat up all the Earth ponies by zapping him with lasers and frying him to a crisp.
So his mom's basically a conspiracy theorist, you would think, right? But then in this first scene, we get little Hitch saying,
Well, that is kind of what our teacher said in history class.
so we know the racist attitudes are taught in school too. The point of these lines is to show the pervasiveness of the xenophobic ideologies in Sonny's community of Maritime Bay and to make us reflect on the white supremacist ideologies that are perpetuated in schools in the US. By the way, what set off Sprout in his quoting of his mom's racist conspiracy theories was Sonny saying this.
It's like in the olden times when all three pony kinds were friends. And they never used their magic against each other.
You're wrong.
So this is an interesting line given that we saw at the end of the movie the unicorns threatened to use magic against a Pegasi, but the unicorns didn't have magic, right? So we should assume that during that scene towards the end that they knew they didn't have magic, right? Like they must have known that because there's no way they wouldn't know that they don't have magic and can't shoot lasers out of their horns or whatever. And if we listen close back in that scene after the unicorns threatened to use their powers, the Pegasus Queen says,
"Surrender the crystal or I'll use my powers against you."
I'd like to see you try.
Which clearly shows that she knew they didn't have magic, especially when considered in addition to how she reacted angrily in earlier scenes when asked by Sonny about their magic or asked by Zip about the flying abilities they're lying about. Given the Queen was well aware she couldn't fly, she clearly knows that the unicorns don't have magic either. Everyday ponies like Sprout's mom, Mrs. Cloverleaf, though, to return to the opening scene, are actually susceptible to the illusions that are propagated by the political figures. Or I guess Mrs. Cloverleaf isn't an ordinary Earth pony, right? I guess she was the one propagating it, except it's kind of unclear because Sonny's dad says she was brainwashing people, but does that mean she's been the CEO the whole time? And if she was the most politically powerful Earth pony in Maritime Bay, it still seems like she was deceived rather than deceiving, especially because all her xenophobia seems to have completely gone away by the end of the film. Sonny's dad seemed to be the only one that knew of the truth of historical pony unity, and after that opening scene, later that night before little Sonny goes to sleep, her dad tells her her favorite bedtime story, which is the exact plot of this film, actually, and then he says goodnight to her by saying this.
Good night, my little pony.
That is actually the name of the movie, if you didn't catch that. I caught that on rewatch because I am very good at film analysis. When the film flashed forward to its present day, as we know, the dad was gone, 100% implied to be dead, and it's kind of weird to just not explain, in my opinion. I know it's like the kids movie trope, but come on, in this political context, my first thought was he was murdered for his radical views. Was he disappeared or something by Mrs. Cloverfield or Cloverleaf or whatever? Like, what happened? One other interesting element to look at on rewatch is that after Sonny does her political demonstration at the Cantor Logic Company event and causes havoc, Hitch tells her he can't keep associating with her since she breaks laws or bylaws as he calls them, though she seems to suffer no other consequences. I mean, Hitch and Sprout later come to her house and she escapes with Izzy the unicorn, but by the way Hitch acts by the time he catches up to her, it's hard to imagine there was any real punishment brewing. It makes sense that a film that depicts personal relationships as the source of political power shows the loss of personal relationships as the main consequence of acts considered criminal. Maybe it's good that they don't seem to have a carceral state in, Maritime Bay. And, okay, so that was all I had to say, actually, about this My Little Pony movie, and that was essentially nothing. Like, I didn't say much, but I found it interesting to watch and break down through my lens, and I hope one or two human beings or ponies enjoyed this video. Thank you to the people who support these videos on Patreon who certainly did not ask for an analysis of My Little Pony. Thank you Elise, put my name in the credits winky face, and a cool anonymous person. If you all watching this would like to support these videos or you'd like to suggest new video topics or politely ask me not to do analyses of My Little Pony or something, you can come send a few bucks over on Patreon, and we also have a bunch of extra videos and music over there that's definitely worth checking out. If I get enough supporters, I can buy all the My Little Pony swag I might ever want or need. Thanks, bye.